Okay, so it's time for the January 2025 wrap up. I'm going to talk about everything I read in January, pick out my books of the month, a little foreshadowing there, and then talk about everything I want to try to read in February. Now, for all these books I read in January, I did full reviews or was on another channel in one instance, and I'll post links to all those videos down in the description. But the first book I finished this year was The Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury. And what a way to start off the year. This was a reread for me, but it had been a long time ago, so it almost felt like reading it for the first time. And it is a collection of short stories that were kind of, linked together as this fix-up novel, but it does feel still like a novel at times. And this is it's a great book. You got Ray Bradbury's prose, which is fantastic, and he's bringing up a lot of interesting ideas about kind of the rise and fall of civilizations, both on Earth and on Mars, with humans and Martians. And it's a classic for a reason. I think if you are into science fiction, you got to read this at some point. And if it's been a while, it might be time for a reread. And then next up was Bug Jack Barron by Norman Spinrad. This was a buddy read with Jake over at Pulp Mortem. And this is supposedly this very controversial book, especially when it came out. And me and Jake were not sure what to think going in, but in the end, I think we both really loved it. We talked about this one for about an hour. I had a whole section where we talked about spoilers in the video, so I timestamped that if you go back and watch the video. But there was a lot of interesting things. There was a lot of discussion about politicians and celebrity and their role in society, and there was a lot of over-the-top characters, a lot of craziness in this one. Very enjoyable, entertaining read. The kind of controversial aspects of this book didn't seem to be that big of a deal. The sexual content, while it can be descriptive at times, he mostly describes this as like metaphor. And it's no worse than any rated R movie you've ever probably watched. And then there is this racial aspect to this book, and there's some language around that and some of the issues that were happening at the time when he wrote this that could probably be the most problematic thing for some people. But it was my favorite Spinrad book that I've read so far, and had a great time talking to Jake about this one. He kept his shirt on during the whole video review, so I'm counting that as a win. And looking forward to do some more content with Jake in the future. And then next up was Pandora's Planet by Christopher Anvil. This is a new thing. My wife kind of came up with an idea. She just goes through and picks out a random book in the library. If I have it in here, I would be willing to read it at some point. And so she picked this one out, and it was pretty good. It had a very clever, interesting concept. It was written from the point of view of these aliens who had taken over Earth basically by brute force. But the humans kept outwitting them because the humans were smarter than these aliens. And so the whole time you're reading from their point of view, but you're rooting for the other side. You're rooting for the humans. And it was a really clever concept, like I said. But it did start to really drag on, and I think this one would have done a lot better as a short story. He did write a short story, but it was really just the first part of the book. I think if it was condensed down into a short story, it probably would have been a little bit overall more entertaining for me, but so glad I read that one. And then next up was The Sword Swallower by Ron Goulart. This is a science fiction comedy, and there is a plot with some political elements, and there's this group called the Chameleon Corps, and they're these spies that can assume these personas and go in, hopefully undetected, to ferret out some information. And the plot was interesting enough, but what was really fun about this one was the characters, the robots, and this setting, this cemetery world called Esperanza, where everybody's sent to be buried and have their funerals. And so the whole culture of this planet is kind of built up around this idea. And it was a very fast, easy read. It was like 150 pages. I think it was a perfect length for what Goulart was trying to do, and it was Goulart's first book. Definitely want to read some more from him in the future. And then next up was the Best of Philip K. Dick. Now, me and Matt from Science Fiction Reads and Richard from Vintage SF have been going through all these Ballantine Del Rey Best of books. And for this one, we actually had Stephen E. Andrews on from the Outlaw Bookseller. This was hosted over on Richard's channel. And it was a great discussion. We talked about Philip K. Dick. We talked about a bunch of the short stories in here. And I had read quite a few of these in the past, but it was really great to reread some of them and read some new ones. And it was really cool to see how Philip K. Dick, especially in the 50s, he was writing some of these themes and ideas up in these short stories that he would later go on to write full-length novels on. And so it was really cool to see those seeds of ideas being kind of, nurtured into what he would later go on and do some of his best work on. So that was a lot of fun. And then next up was Robert Silverberg, A Time of Changes. This was a great book. It kind of felt like two halves of each half of this book was uniquely different. The first half was a lot of world building and character building about this colony world that had this kind of unique religious and social structure about it. And you get to know this main character. He hints at some things in the beginning, but about halfway through the novel is when he goes through his time of change. And he meets somebody, he gets introduced to some drugs, and it's like this paradigm shift in his thinking and the way this planet is ran. So it was very interesting. It was great to see Silverberg approach some of these themes, and I hadn't really read a science fiction book quite like this, tackling some of these interesting themes. I really took it as a response to like the 60s drug revolution and people like Timothy Leary. But down in the comments, I got a lot of other interesting comments from people who brought up a lot of other good points. And I think it goes to show how good of a writer Silverberg is, where he can write these themes and leave enough ambiguous, open-ended parts that different people can pull different parts of their own life into this almost. And so it was a really great book, and I'm really glad I read that one. And then next up was The Black Cloud by Fred Hoyle. This was a buddy read with Nick over at the Book Graveyard. I think we both thought this was going to be a little bit more of a post-apocalyptic book. If you look at the cover, if you read the back, and it is, there's this black cloud in space that's heading towards the sun, and no one's sure what exactly is going to happen when it comes by Earth. But this is really a lot of scientists and astronomers sitting in a room, drinking scotch, smoking cigars and pipes, talking about what's going to happen, theorizing about it, speculating. And there's very little time spent on the actual apocalypse and what's happening on Earth when this thing comes by. I still really enjoyed it. I thought there was some funny, witty humor. They did a lot of hating on politicians, which I appreciated. But it did lean into the harder science fiction, and there was math and equations, and parts of it did feel a little dry. I definitely liked it more than Nick, but overall we had a great time talking about it, and all these collaborations I've been doing with people have been a lot of fun. If it was just me talking about that book, kind of probably would have been a little one-dimensional. It was great to have someone else's point of view, especially someone who didn't like it as much as me, and it made me kind of understand, coming from an outside source. I work in an engineering company, so this book is definitely better suited for someone like me. So it was great to have Nick's opinions on that one. And then next up was The Blade Runner by Alan E. Nourse. I talk in the beginning of the video about the title and how it's linked to Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep's film adaptation, and all the background on that. It's probably more of the interesting side of the video. This was a good, solidly written kind of medical science fiction thriller, but it had this really wild premise about eugenics and the health system, basically where in order to get free healthcare, you have to agree to be sterilized. And there was a lot of the plot that just didn't seem that plausible. It was a really interesting idea, And it was a very fast, easy read, but I still got a little hung up on some parts of the book. But Alan E. Norris is a great author. He's a doctor, and I have some other works from him. I have a collection of short stories called Tiger by the Tail that I probably am going to read next. But I'm really glad I read that one. And then The Goblin Reservation by Clifford Simic was the last book that I read this month. And this is going to be a video that comes out on Sean D. Standfast channel. We've been reading a Simic book a month. And man, I really enjoyed this one. I'll just briefly talk about this one, I guess. A man comes back to Earth from this mission and finds out that he had already come back earlier and had died. So there's some copy of him, and he has no idea how this happened. He went out on a mission and he got kind of stopped along the way on this weird world, and then returned to Earth without really completing his mission. And so this whole mystery around that is mainly what this book is about. But man, Clifford went to some really crazy places in this one. There's a lot of very wild, interesting things that happen with. He tends to take fantasy elements and turn them into science fiction, and it was a wild ride, and you could see a lot of the other books that we've read recently that he'd written around this time period, and it's almost like he took parts of all those books and put them into this one, but this one just had a really good story, a plot. He wrapped it all up in a neat package. I liked the ending. I liked everything about this one. So as far as my books of the month go, it's kind of I'm going to call it a three-way tie. Martian Chronicles, I don't have to stand up here and talk about that one because it's such a well-known book, but it is so good. And then this was just a lot of fun, reading these stories and then having the discussion with the whole crew on that one. Hard to not enjoy that. And then Goblin Reservation, this was just one of my favorite Simic books that I've read in a while. And excited to be on Sean's channel with a big group of people and talk about that one. Okay, so now let's get into what I'm going to be reading or have already started. So I'm about halfway through Startide Rising by David Brin. This is going to be a buddy read with Joseph over at Joseph Reads Books. And that should be the first video review that comes out after this. I am enjoying it. It is a very dense, interesting book. I'm really excited to see how this one ends. And then after that is To Your Scattered Bodies Go by Philip Jose Farmer. Another buddy read. That one's going to be with Brian over at Bad Taste Books. So I read that a long time ago. I remember parts of it, but I'm excited to reread that and hopefully read the other River World novels. So then the next Simic book for February on Sean D. Standfast channel is Cosmic Engineers. This is Simic's first official novel that he wrote. I've never read that one, so that's going to be exciting to read that. The next in our best of series is going to be on Matt's channel, and he picked out the best of Henry Kuttner. I'm not exactly sure when we're going to do that one. It might be in February, it might be later, but I'll be probably slowly reading some of those short stories throughout the month until we do that video. And then I really want to read The Star Virus by Barrington J. Bailey. And this is an ace double. On the other side is John Jake's Mask of Chaos. I might go ahead and read both of them, but this looks to be a very short, easy read. I'll try to fit that in at some point this month. And then The Weapon Shops of Isher. I've really been wanting to read this for a while. I've read quite a few from Van Vogt, but I haven't read that one. And it's supposed to be some real foundational science fiction, so really want to read that. And then Jack Williamson, The Humanoids. This, I've never read anything from Jack Williamson, and he was one of these original kind of golden age writers and had a very long-standing career, so I really want to get to that one. And then my wife's next wildcard pick is The Girl from Emeraldine Island by Robert S. Blum. I looked some stuff up. This is Blum's only novel he ever wrote. I hope I like this one, but it's kind of got an interesting cover here. But I'm going to get to that at some point. It might be in February, but it might be after that. So that's it for the month of January. And you know, everything I'm going to try to read in February. Go ahead and let me know what you read in January and some of your favorite reads and maybe what you're thinking about reading in February. But that's going to be it for this video. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.